Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I encourage you to hit that like button, to subscribe for more quality content, and to share with your friends. I also encourage you to check out my books. I will put the link in the description to my author page, and I also hope that you will check out the playlist tab for more videos. I'm Phoenix. I describe myself as being a philosopher, as being someone who loves ideas. I don't describe myself necessarily in the traditional context of philosopher. I suppose that goes to the greats or to the ones that are interesting to the academics. But I still nonetheless think a lot about ideas, and I think a lot about my thought process, or more specifically, I think of process. Process is a difficult thing to understand. I think our tendency in life, in our minds, the way that we seem to be hardwired to be, is to see things as being static. I think whenever we struggle with some kind of difficulty in life, or whenever we might have a mental illness or certain barriers that prevent us from seeing what is really there, I think it is easy for us to see things as being static. But things are always moving. Sometimes this is bad. Certainly it can lead to chaos, confusion. It can be hard to change and to adapt to new circumstances. But it can also be a good thing for bringing us out of things that are otherwise not good. Because this is the whole notion of change, of progress. Now, in life, I think there are a lot of inconsistencies, and by inconsistencies I mean we may be able to apply something that we may think is true to the world or to our own behavior, and we may get a completely different reaction, while other times what we do may be completely effective for the desired result. And while I myself wouldn't say that things are always about a certain result, I think there is a way in which we want to be able to some degree to be able to predict the world. We want to be able to drive safely, for instance, and predict what other drivers are going to do. We want to be able to predict what we ourselves are going to say or act in any given circumstance, to be able to mitigate conflict. But it seems that sometimes our ideas are extremely inconsistent in general, and they're inconsistent at odds and even in conflict with the world. This can be a difficult thing. Now, on my channel, I have a playlist where I made 3 off-the-cuff videos on process philosophy. I encourage you to check that out. Just check out the playlist tab for that specific tab. But my whole thought has been centered around the notion of process as being the way of the world. Our mind, as an example, isn't static, as the Cartesians might lead us to believe. They are instead a process, if we were to go off William James's notion. There's also the idea that entities in our minds, ideas, are not static, but that they are also a process. We could also say that life itself is a process. At one point before we existed, our basically atoms were in the world, and our stardust was in the universe. But eventually we came to be, and we rose on this planet, and we were born. And it's very interesting to think about how oftentimes, at least in my mind, it is so easy for me to think that things stay the same. But I really think that this idea can often come to our detriment, because we don't immediately realize that the circumstances that we imagine are going to change. And we have to keep this in mind, though I think that it is often very difficult. But what do we do whenever we feel as though we are at odds with the Zeitgeist, or with the way that the world is, or with the dominating ideologies that surround us? How do we come to our own conclusions? And certainly this is a very difficult thing. Now, the way that I want to understand concepts in terms of thinking about the way in which we look at the world is, I think that it is very helpful to not see the concepts in our minds, such as our experience, such as our ideas, such as the way of being in the world, as being a static thing. It, I think, is very helpful to see these things as being part of a process, as being part of something that changes, as being part of anything that is not the same as it was before. Often I think ideas are only valuable if there can be an interplay with other people who have other ideas. And so, often I would describe traditions that are influenced by Eastern philosophy, such as Taoism, for example, you do get this notion that concepts really are what we make of them. Concepts are not this static thing. that concepts have the potential to change the world, and they do change the world, and that they shouldn't be the only way in which we view the world. And the reason why I bring this idea up is because I'm very fascinated by this notion of dynamics in the world, between our ideas and the world around us. I'm very fascinated by the dynamics and the fluidity of these things. And I myself struggle with this, because I feel as though I am often conditioned to respond a certain way. I feel as though there is only one way that I can respond. And maybe in a large variety of contexts this is true. Certainly we have certain ways and norms of operating in the public sphere, whether we are in the grocery store as an example, but there are other ways that we can engage. And my process has always been to try to figure out what those ways are. And that's why I take ideas so seriously. And that's why I think that they are so important. And so my process can often be kind of scary sometimes. And the process itself, process writ large with a capital P, it can be very difficult sometimes to be able to engage with this kind of fluctuating, rapidly changing world. But I find a certain beauty in the idea of things as being processed. And a lot of that is because I think that there is a value in realizing that things change. That things don't have to be a certain way for all of time. That it's okay to let things be what they're going to be and to become. I mean, the notion of self-actualization or becoming who we are could not happen if we had a static notion of the self. But the reality is, in my process, there's a lot of anxiety and despair and negative feelings. And a lot of this is because it's hard to process the world. It's hard to come to the most ethical conclusions because we are biased as human beings. We do tend to act in tribalistic ways. We do tend to be very harsh and judgmental towards other people. We do tend to, I would even describe, contribute to destruction by being unable to appreciate the nuance and complexity and dynamics of all of the people around us. And this is really hard. But the reason why I choose the process of anxiety as an example when it comes to thinking about my ideas, utilizing them, testing them, thinking through them, is because even though it's hard to do that, we kind of get a feeling of Camus and the myth of Sisyphus and this feeling of dread. The way that I understand it, it can also bring us to a degree of, I believe, a large degree of at least some stability, not necessarily certainty, though we could certainly have some of that when our ideas become more foundational. But there is a way in which I think that doing this process, this kind of Kierkegaardian exploration, allows us to see the world in a more nuanced way. It allows us to understand our own ideas and our own inner monologue and the ways in which we're viewing the world. And I think this is very valuable. I do think that in life, there are often paradoxes. So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that in order to understand ourselves, in order to understand the world, we have to be able to say things. But often in a lot of contexts in life, we can't say things. And so we're at odds. Our individual personal self is at odds with the things that are in the world, the things that are around us. And this can be very difficult. And I do think that it is easy for us to become, I would describe, inundated and instantiated in these paradoxes, where there are so many things that seem to be at odds. But the thing that I would continually express is that we are progressing. We can progress. I know that certain thinkers, such as Eric Weinstein, would say that Steven Pinker's notion of progress is actually very flawed, and I understand this to a large degree, but I would describe progress as being one of the ways in which we continue to move through the world, and believe that we can make things better if only we are willing to confront the things that are holding us back and the things that could make things better. If only we were cognizant of that. And so part of it is just untangling these paradoxes. Now, I'll admit, I'm not a conflict-oriented person, so it's often very hard for me to convey things that I think are very true in many of the contexts in which I find myself in. And one of the things that I realized is that I have to at least be able to come to some version of stability with myself. I have to be able to understand my own psychology and the way in which I'm interacting with the world and the way in which my ideas affect other people and the way in which my behavior affects people. And this is very important to me. But also there is an extent to which I also have to accept that sometimes I myself or my ideas will be at odds with the world. This always happens to people. When there's billions of people that have lived and live now, we're never going to have complete agreement on anything if we ever have agreement at all. And it's unfortunate that a lot of, I think, atypical different perspectives are not often appreciated or understood because they don't fit the norm. They don't fit the view of billions of people, or even millions of people, even thousands of people. And so this can be very difficult. Now, I hope that you enjoyed this talk. I would describe myself as being in a moment of transformation. I'm seeing myself as being in a moment where I am definitely changing. And I think some of this growth that I'm experiencing there's a very rapid onset of it, because I think that I'm realizing a lot of things that I think have always held me back. And certainly we can be spurred on by our own determination. There is a huge way in which we can continue to understand the world by understanding ourselves, and I think this self-reflection, this introspection, a retrospection of our lives and our ideas and our attitudes is extremely important. And so that is my process. And I would say that I think the process of the universe is, among many different multitudes of possibilities, I think it is a process itself. I think that it is often in flux. And this can be one of the most frustrating things, but also one of the most liberating things about being a human being. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this talk. Definitely check out my other videos, and I will be making much more content, so keep a lookout. I'm Phoenix, and thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.